The Richardson Gang, London's torture gang. A warehouse, South London, 1965. A man is tied to a chair, stripped naked, blood on the concrete floor beneath him. Charlie Richardson sits across from him, calm, smoking. Behind him, mad Frankie Fraser, holding pliers. "You've been skimming," Charlie says. The man denies it, begs, pleads his case. Charlie nods. Roy Hall steps forward with a field telephone generator from the Korean War, cranks the handle. Electrodes attached to genitals. The crank turns. Voltage surges. The screaming is inhuman. When it's over, hours later, the victim is given a clean shirt, Charlie's trademark. Taking a shirt from Charlie, they called it, because the original was always covered in blood. Before the glamorous Kray Twins became household names, there was a gang operating south of the Thames that made the Krays look like amateurs. The Richardson Gang, also known as the Torture Gang. And this is their true story. Act 1. Origins. Period. January 18th, 1934. Brentford, Middlesex. Charles William Richardson is born to Eileen Elizabeth Mary Allen and Charles Frederick Richardson, who had married the previous year in Camberwell, South London. 2 years later, January 21st, 1936, Edward George Richardson arrives. Eddie. A third child follows in 1940, their younger sister, Elaine. The family moves back to Camberwell, working class, poor, and then their father, a merchant seaman and prizefighter, deserts them entirely. Charlie and Eddie are raised by their mother alone. She's resourceful. She runs a sweet shop in southeast London. But there's a secret. She's also buying stolen goods, providing a steady income from the black market. This is the brothers' first education in crime, not from their absent father, from their mother's quiet, systematic lawbreaking. Period. Charlie was the eldest, strong, intelligent, natural leader. Eddie was quieter, more methodical. Both were talented boxers and prominent street fighters, navigating wartime childhood in bombed-out South London. Rare fact, by age 22, Charlie Richardson owned 6 scrapyards, having plundered remnants of abandoned wartime airfields during the post-war scrap metal boom. The brothers started legitimate. Scrap metal was booming in post-war Britain. Bombed buildings, abandoned airfields, military surplus, all gold if you knew how to move it. But legitimacy wasn't enough. By the late 1950s, the Richardson brothers had an empire in South London, and they were just getting started. Act 2. The Empire begins. Up. Late 1950s. The Richardson brothers weren't just scrap dealers, slot machines, in pubs across South London. These businesses were fronts for underworld activities, including fraud, extortion, usury, theft, and fencing stolen goods. Eddie's method was elegant. Suggest that a pub landlord buy one of his fruit machines. Failure to comply meant the pub got vandalized. Simple, effective. But their real innovation was the long-firm fraud. Here's how it worked. Set up a company. Run it legitimately for months. Build credit. Win trust from suppliers. Then place a massive order on credit. Sell everything for cash. Pocket the money. Disappear. The patsy who fronted the company went to prison. The Richardsons kept the profits. Rare fact, their first torture room dates back to 1955 inside a warehouse, years before they became publicly known. By the early 1960s, they ran a string of clubs, the Cavern in Lordship Lane, Dulwich, the Orange Club in Walworth Road, the Shirley Ann in New Cross. Their territory stretched from Camberwell to Deptford, Bermondsey to Brixton, south of the Thames. This was Richardson country. Charlie was the businessman, the strategist. He had interests in wholesale chemists, mineral mining, even South African mining deals. He rubbed shoulders with high-level figures. Eddie was the enforcer, the muscle. And then they recruited the most dangerous man in London, Frank "Mad Frankie" Fraser. Act 3. The Torture Factory. Frankie Fraser, career criminal since age 13. Shoplifting, desertion during World War II. Known associate of Billy Hill throughout the 1950s. When Frankie joined the Richardsons, a rival gangster said it was like China getting the atom bomb. Because Frankie's specialty, his favorite brand of punishment, was extracting teeth with pliers. He became known as the dentist. But the Richardson Gang's methods went far beyond pliers. Their alleged specialties included pulling teeth out using pliers, cutting off toes using bolt cutters, and nailing victims to floors using 6-inch nails. Mock trials were conducted at their Peckham scrapyard. Eddie prosecuting. Charlie judging. Victims accused of stealing, skimming, or informing faced sentencing. Punishments included whippings, cigarette burns, electric shocks to the genitals via field telephone generators, teeth pulled with pliers, fingers and toes removed with bolt cutters, being nailed to warehouse floors for days. One collector of protection money was nailed to the floor of a warehouse near Tower Bridge for nearly 2 days, during which time gang members like driver Harry Beard frequently urinated on him. After torture sessions ended, Charlie Richardson would give each victim a clean shirt to wear home. This became known as taking a shirt from Charlie because the victim's original shirt was usually covered in blood. Myth versus reality. In later years, Frankie Fraser claimed the charges of torture were exaggerated, crying rubbish to stories of electrified genitals, saying it was all false. Today, we wouldn't have even been charged. But court testimony from multiple victims, including former gang member Johnny Bradbury, who turned Queen's evidence, painted a different picture. Witnesses routinely forgot details due to fear, bribes, or deliberate intimidation. The wall of silence around the Richardsons was absolute, until it wasn't. Act 4. The South London War. The Kray Twins, East London. Celebrities, nightclubs, photography spreads. The Richardson Gang, South London. No cameras, no celebrity, just systematic brutality. You had the Krays and the Richardsons, but I think the Richardsons were more violent than the Krays. Former Detective Superintendent John Cummings said, "The Richardsons were frighteners, really vicious people." The gangs met once in the early 1960s at a pub on Walworth Road. The Krays wanted to introduce themselves. Eddie Richardson later said, "It was perfectly amiable but meant nothing to us and was of no value. We were businessmen and made money legally. The Krays didn't have a clue how to make a few bob." But tensions escalated. Charlie Richardson and George Cornell first met the Krays while all were imprisoned at Shepton Mallet Military Prison. Wariness evolved into open hostility. December 1965. Christmas party at the Astor Club. George Cornell, Richardson gang member, calls Ronnie Kray a fat poof. A fight ensues. March 7, 1966. Mr. Smith's Club in Rushy Green, Catford. A brawl. Gunfire. Chaos. Richard Hart, associate of the Krays, shot dead. 7 or 8 others wounded, including Frankie Fraser and Eddie Richardson. Myth-busting. Eddie Richardson. Until then, the Krays had never had the bottle to make a move against us. George used to call Ronnie a fat poof. If they were ever going to do anything against us, then George would be the one they would go after. The night after the Mr. Smith's shootout, with Eddie and Frankie hospitalized under arrest and Charlie in South Africa, Ronnie Kray walked into the Blind Beggar pub and shot George Cornell through the forehead. The coast was clear, the Richardsons were vulnerable, and Scotland Yard was watching. Act 5. The Fall. July 30th, 1966. England is playing West Germany in the World Cup final. And at dawn, 70 police officers raid homes across southeast London. Charlie Richardson was arrested at his home, seized in bed, on the day of the World Cup final. 11 gang members arrested. Tools of torture seized. Bloodstains documented. Witnesses, terrified for years, finally willing to talk. April 1967. The Old Bailey. The trial begins. It becomes known as the torture trial. The jury heard evidence of sadistic brutality rarely heard in an English court. In the dock, Charlie Richardson, Eddie Richardson, Mad Frankie Fraser. Over 30 charges. The star witness, Johnny Bradbury, former Richardson member who turned Queen's evidence, offering to inform in exchange for a pardon and immunity. Victim after victim testified. Petty fraudster Benny Colston claimed he was tortured in Charlie Richardson's office and that Frankie Fraser tore his teeth out with pliers after being accused of stealing 600 pounds. Rare fact, the courtroom had unprecedented armed police presence due to fears of retaliation or escape attempts. Verdicts: guilty, fraud, extortion, assault, grievous bodily harm. Charlie Richardson, 25 years in prison. Eddie Richardson, 10 years, plus an additional 5 years for the Mr. Smith's affray, totaling 15 years. Mad Frankie Fraser received 5 years for affray and 10 years for torture at the Richardsons' Peckham scrapyard. Sentencing: Sir Frederick Lawton said, "One is ashamed to live in a society with men like you. It must be made clear to all those who set themselves up as gang members that they will be struck down by the law, as you will be struck down." Eddie Richardson received harsher sentences than the Krays, despite the Krays being convicted of actual murders. Why? Because the systematic, premeditated nature of the Richardson Gang's torture was considered more depraved than crimes of passion. The empire collapsed. Act 6. Aftermath and Legacy. Charlie Richardson was released in July 1984 after serving 17 years. In 1980, he escaped from open prison, went on the trot for almost a year, even dressing as Santa Claus and giving out presents to children to publicize his requests for release. After his final release, Charlie wrote an autobiography, My Manor. In 1992, he reflected that the City of London's financial dealings were more dishonest than his criminal enterprises. He died September 19, 2012, aged 78, peritonitis and blood poisoning. Eddie Richardson was released in 1978 after serving 11 years. He returned to the scrap metal business, partnered with Frankie Fraser in the fruit machine industry, expanded into adult entertainment. Then, 1990, Eddie was sentenced to 35 years after being convicted of involvement in a £70 million cocaine and cannabis heist. He was released after 12 years, bringing his total time served to 23 years. The brothers fell out badly after Eddie accused Charlie of fraudulent business deals during Eddie's imprisonment. Eddie Richardson is still alive, the last man standing of the infamous London gang bosses of the 1960s. Legacy. The Richardson Gang professionalized organized crime in Britain in ways that shaped the next 3 decades. They introduced systematic torture as enforcement, corporate-style organization, with divisions for fraud, gambling, and debt collection, international criminal connections, South Africa, sophisticated money laundering through legitimate businesses. Unlike the Krays, who craved celebrity, the Richardson Gang craved control. Their methods influenced yardie gangs in the 1980s, 90s, triad enforcement tactics, Irish crews operating in London, modern organized crime's use of systematic violence. Historians consider the Richardson Gang the most violent organized crime group of their era, not because they killed the most people, but because they systematized brutality. Torture wasn't spontaneous. It was strategic, methodical, a business practice. Act 7. Closing. The Kray Twins had glamour, celebrity, mythology. They had Frank Sinatra at their clubs, David Bailey photographs, film adaptations. The Richardson Gang had pliers, electric generators, blood-soaked warehouses. And they were far more dangerous, because the Krays killed in moments of rage, paranoia, and ego. The Richardsons tortured as policy. They held mock trials, assigned punishments, methodically destroyed anyone who threatened their empire. When police finally raided their operations, they found tools of torture cataloged and stored like office supplies. This wasn't chaos. This was infrastructure. Today, the Richardson Gang is less famous than the Krays. There are fewer films, fewer books. But ask any former London gangster from the 1960s who they feared more. The answer is always the same. Walk through Camberwell today, past the old scrapyards, the pubs where Eddie placed his fruit machines, the warehouses where screams echoed off concrete walls. The buildings are still there, some converted, some demolished, but the memory remains. The court heard tales of mock trials conducted in the scrapyard, of electric shocks, forced confessions, and unrelenting cruelty. That was the Richardson legacy. Not celebrity, not mythology, just brutal, systematic, unflinching violence. The torture gang, South London's nightmare, and the most dangerous criminals Britain had ever seen.